What if I told you that um, two completely identical electric cars driving the exact same daily route could have a 300% difference in their monthly fuel bills?
Yeah, that really shocks people.
Right. Not because of how the owners drive, not
Hmm.
because of traffic, simply because of what time the clock strikes 6:00 p.m. and, exactly whose driveway they decide to park in.
It completely shatters the illusion of the uniform gas station. I mean, we spent a century building this fueling infrastructure where the cost of a liter of petrol is essentially the same whether you buy it at noon in the city center or, like, at midnight on the highway.
Yeah, we're totally wired to expect standardization.
Exactly. But the transition to electric mobility has introduced this level of economic volatility that most consumers are just completely unprepared for.
Welcome to this deep dive.
Hmm.
So let's unpack this. Buying an EV in India right now is generally pitched as this financial no-brainer, right?
Okay.
You're escaping the relentless volatility of petrol and diesel prices.
Oh, absolutely. That's the main selling point.
But the reality of 2026 is that how and where you actually plug that vehicle in can either save you an absolute fortune or trigger these hidden penalties that make it, honestly, nearly as expensive as running a combustion car.
Yeah, it's a completely different landscape now.
And we are looking at a stack of incredibly detailed sources today to navigate this for you. We've got the 2026 cost of EV charging in India, definitive guide by Fart Revolt, some really strategic policy documents from NTI Aayog outlining the National Infrastructure Master Plan, deep research from NLR on smart charge management, and some truly fascinating deep tech case studies on fleet logistics from ZevPoint.
The value of this specific stack of research is that it just cuts completely through the automotive marketing fluff.
Oh, the dealership pitch.
Right, the dealerships sell you on the theoretical maximum savings based on this perfect scenario. But these sources analyze the messy, real-world constraints of actual Indian infrastructure.
So our mission for you today is to equip you with an absolute mathematically proven blueprint for minimizing your EV charging costs. We are going to break down the exact cost differences between home charging, public charging, and the rapidly growing sector of peer-to-peer or P2P charging.
Which is such a massive shift in how we think about infrastructure.
Totally. We'll contrast the utopian reality of the independent homeowner with the, frankly, stark bureaucratic reality of the apartment dweller. We'll give you a strict decision-making guide for your daily routines. And then we'll reveal how these exact same charging strategies scale all the way up from a single urban commuter to massive commercial logistics fleets dealing with the absolute limits of the national power grid.
The foundational shift you have to make before we even touch the math is realizing that the paradigm has entirely shifted. We have moved from the business of buying fuel to the business of managing energy.
Managing energy. I like that phrasing.
Yeah, people still treat EVs exactly like combustion cars. They think of a battery like a gas tank and a charger like a pump. You drive until the dashboard says empty, then you pull up to a station to fill it up.
Right. That's just muscle memory at this point.
Exactly. But understanding the exact mathematical variables of this new energy paradigm is the absolute only way to actually realize the promised return on investment of an EV.
Moving from buying fuel to managing energy. That is the perfect lens for this. But before we can start planning out a weekly schedule or, budgeting for a family road trip, we have to build our baseline. Let's look at the foundational formula that dictates every single rupee you spend on an EV.
It's actually a pretty straightforward equation once you break it down.
Yeah. So the formula is real charging cost equals battery capacity in kilowatt hours multiplied by your electricity tariff in rupees per kilowatt hour multiplied by a loss factor.
Let's break down the physical mechanisms behind those variables, starting with battery capacity. In the Indian market right now, you generally have 3 tiers.
Right, the different car sizes.
Yeah. You have your small city EVs sitting around 30 kilowatt hours. Then you have your mid-size segment around 40 kilowatt hours. And finally, your long-range vehicles pushing 50 to 60 kilowatt hours.
The battery is essentially just a bucket of energy.
Exactly. The capacity is just the volume of energy required to go from 0 to 100%. But the volume isn't what bankrupts the uninformed owner. The tariff is where the economic divergence happens.
The tariff is the absolute wild card. The Heart Revolt Guide shows this is the single biggest differentiator in your running costs.
Yeah.
If you are charging at home On a residential tariff, you're looking at roughly 5 to 10 rupees per kilowatt hour, heavily dependent on your state and your specific consumption slab.
Right, geography plays a huge role here.
Exactly. Like a home user in Goa might pay 6 rupees per unit, while someone in Mumbai might hit 10. But the moment you move away from your personal meter, the math changes violently.
It really does spike.
If you tap into a peer-to-peer network, you're looking at 10 to 14 rupees per kilowatt hour. If you go to a public AC charger, it jumps to 12 to 16. And if you pull up to a public DC fast charger, you're suddenly paying 18 to 26 rupees per kilowatt hour.
And that price escalation isn't arbitrary. But before we diagnose the pricing of public infrastructure, we have to address the third variable in that formula, the one almost nobody talks about on the showroom floor.
The loss factor.
The loss factor, yes. This is the hidden tax of physics. When you move electricity from the grid into your car's battery, it is not a perfectly efficient transfer. Energy is lost primarily as heat and through the inefficiencies of the onboard AC to DC converter.
Wait, I want to pause on that mechanism. Why is there a translation happening at all? Why doesn't the energy just flow straight in?
It comes down to the fundamental nature of the grid versus the battery. The national electrical grid transmits alternating current, or AC power. It's efficient for moving electricity over hundreds of kilometers.
Like the big transmission lines.
Exactly. But a lithium-ion battery can only store direct current, or DC power. So every EV has an onboard charger, essentially an internal converter, that takes the grid's AC power and translates it into DC power to feed the battery cells.
Oh, so the car itself is doing the heavy lifting there.
Yes, and that translation process requires energy to operate, and it generates heat. If you are doing a slow AC charge at home, you lose about 5 to 8% of the power to this process. Mathematically, we use a multiplier of 1.08.
So you're paying for 108 units of electricity on your bill, but only 100 units actually make it into your battery to drive the wheels.
Precisely. That's your baseline loss.
Okay, so that's the baseline loss for slow charging. But the sources show that the loss factor spikes massively when you use a public DC fast charger. The multiplier jumps to 1.12 or even 1.15. You're losing 15% of the energy you pay for. Why does speed create more waste?
This requires a look at the chemical reality of lithium-ion intercalation.
Okay, big word there,
Okay.
intercalation.
Right. It just means how the ions move. When you charge a battery, you are literally forcing lithium ions to move from the cathode across an electrolyte and embed themselves into the microscopic structure of the graphite anode.
Okay, I'm following.
If you use slow AC power, the ions migrate at a manageable pace. They find their designated slots in the graphite structure smoothly. But when you hook up to a massive public DC fast charger pushing 60 or 120 kilowatts, you are violently flooding the system with ions.
I've heard this described like a crowded parking lot.
That is the perfect way to visualize it. Imagine the anode as a massive multi-level parking garage. When the garage is empty, say, the battery's at 10%, you can flood hundreds of cars into the entrance at high speed.
Because there are open spots everywhere on the first floor.
Exactly. They will immediately find open spots. There is very little friction. But as the garage fills up, as you cross that 70 or 80% threshold, the remaining cars have to drive up to the 5th or 6th floor, slowly cruising up and down the aisles, looking for the last few open spots.
And if you keep trying to force cars into the entrance at the exact same high speed when the garage is 85% full, you get a massive traffic jam.
You get honking, you get friction, you get heat. In the battery, that chemical traffic jam generates immense destructive heat. The car's thermal management system has to kick into overdrive.
So the car is actively fighting the heat.
Yes, using high-powered fans and liquid cooling loops to pull that heat away from the cells so they don't literally catch fire or suffer micro-tears in the anode structure. All of those cooling systems require massive amounts of electricity to run.
Wow. So when you are at a fast charger, you are paying the premium 26 rupees per kilowatt hour rate, not just to fill your battery, but to run industrial-grade air conditioning systems just to keep the battery from destroying itself. That is your 15% loss factor. That is wild. Let's put the final blended numbers to this formula so you listening right now can actually visualize the impact. Let's take that mid-sized 40 kilowatt hour battery.
Okay, let's run the math.
If you charge that at home with a typical 8 rupee tariff and an 8% loss factor, a full charge costs you roughly 346 rupees. Now take that exact same car to a public DC fast charger. You're hit with a 20 rupee tariff and a 12% loss factor due to the heat and cooling requirements.
And the jump is staggering.
Suddenly, that exact same full charge costs you 864 rupees. You just paid 2.5 times more for the exact same amount of driving range.
Translating that to the ultimate metric, cost per kilometer, clarifies the landscape immediately. Assuming a realistic city efficiency of about 7 kilometers per kilowatt hour, home charging costs you roughly 1.14 rupees per kilometer.
That's incredibly cheap.
It is, but that public DC fast charging, that pushes 2.86 rupees per kilometer.
So treating a public fast charger like a regular gas station is essentially like paying the exorbitant minibar price for a bottle of water in your hotel room every single day, instead of just filling your glass from the tap in your kitchen.
That is exactly what it is, a convenience tax.
But I have to push back here. Look, 26 rupees a unit is incredibly high. If the raw electricity from the grid costs the utility company a fraction of that, why is public charging so outrageously expensive? Is this a case of charging network operators artificially inflating prices because they know a traveler with a 5% battery on the highway has zero leverage?
It is tempting to view it as price gouging, but an analysis of the operational expenditures shows a much more systemic issue. Public charging stations are bound by brutal commercial realities.
Okay, like what?
First, they do not get subsidized residential electricity rates. They are classified under commercial or industrial tariffs. Second, the hardware is staggeringly expensive. A proper DC fast charger costs between 15 to 25 lakh rupees per unit.
Wow, just for the physical box.
Exactly. But the real silent killer is the utility company's billing structure.
Oh, the demand charges.
Yes. Utility companies hit commercial operators with massive demand charges, which are essentially penalties for drawing large amounts of power simultaneously.
How does that work in practice?
Well, if a charging station has 4 DC fast chargers and 4 cars pull up and plug in at the exact same moment, the instantaneous draw on the local grid is immense. The utility company has to build physical infrastructure transformers and substations capable of handling that absolute peak moment, even if it only happens once a month.
So the grid has to be overbuilt just in case.
Right. And they pass the cost of that infrastructure directly to the charging operator in the form of a peak demand fee. Add in an 18% GST, land leasing costs in premium urban areas or highway rest stops, routine maintenance, and software gateway fees. The operator is forced to pass those costs on to the consumer just to break even.
Which brings us to a massive, glaring divide in the Indian EV story. The homeowner's utopia versus the apartment resident's reality. Because knowing the math is great, it mathematically proved that home charging is the undisputed champion of economics.
Without a doubt.
But what happens if you literally cannot install a charger? This single factor dictates entirely different, almost unrecognizable ownership experiences.
It effectively creates 2 distinct classes of EV owners. The homeowner, with a dedicated driveway or garage, operates in a frictionless environment. They achieve that absolute lowest possible running cost of 1.1 to 1.3 rupees per kilometer effortlessly.
They just plug in and forget about it.
Yeah. And they have the luxury of optimizing it further. They can set their smart charger to only draw power overnight during off-peak hours when the household load is lowest and the grid voltage is most stable.
Or if they have the budget, solar panels.
Exactly. If they have capital to deploy, they install rooftop solar. The amortized cost of solar power drops their effective charging tariff to an almost absurd 1 to 3 rupees per kilowatt hour. They are essentially driving on sunlight for pennies.
It's the absolute dream of energy independence. But the demographic reality of India is that millions upon millions of urban residents in Tier 1 cities like Mumbai, Bengaluru, and Delhi live in high-rise apartments.
That's a huge portion of the market.
If you are in that demographic, you might feel completely locked out of this EV revolution. You're stuck with shared basement parking, you don't own the wall next to your car, you face intense structural barriers.
The primary barrier isn't even technological, honestly. It's bureaucratic. The resident welfare associations, or RWAs.
The infamous RWAs.
The NNTA IOG documents point out that RWAs frequently block charger installations outright. The stated reason is usually a perceived fire risk, driven by sensationalized news of battery fires, despite statistical evidence showing internal combustion vehicles catch fire at significantly higher rates.
It's just an optics thing.
Largely, yes. But the unstated reasons are often about infrastructure limitations. High-rise basements weren't designed with the electrical load of 50 EVs in mind.
Even if the RWA is progressive and grants you a no-objection certificate, the physical logistics are a nightmare. Your designated parking spot might be on basement level 3, but your personal residential electricity meter is on the ground floor on the other side of the compound.
The cabling alone becomes a massive project.
Right. You're looking at running hundreds of meters of heavy-duty armored copper cabling through shared corridors. The cabling alone can cost more than the charger. Any IOG's report notes that a proper 7.4 kilowatt wall box setup, including the hardware and average complex installation, costs 45,000 to 90,000 rupees upfront.
That's a significant barrier to entry.
So if you live in a high-rise and can't absorb that upfront cost or defeat the RWA, are you just doomed to rely on public AC chargers at 2.0 rupees per kilometer, or the minibar DC chargers at nearly 3.0 rupees per kilometer?
Well, the policy sector is attempting to address this, and EIOG is pushing state-level mandates requiring 10% of all parking in large commercial and residential complexes to be EV-ready.
Okay, that's a start.
They are also drafting right-to-charge frameworks, which would legally prevent RWAs from unreasonably denying a resident the ability to install a charger.
But policy is a slow, grinding instrument.
It really is. It requires legislative approval, municipal enforcement, and years of legal precedent. If you bought a car today, you cannot wait 5 years for a municipal court to force your RWA's hand.
And this is exactly where the market has stepped in, with an immediate, highly effective, and deeply disruptive solution: the rise of peer-to-peer, or P2P, charging networks.
This is such a fascinating development.
It is. The struggle of the apartment resident has birthed a decentralized economy that perfectly bridges the vast economic gap between home charging and public charging. Let's define this clearly. How does an individual tap into a P2P network?
The architecture is very similar to the sharing economy models we already use. Platforms like Revolt have built digital networks where individuals who do have home chargers, those homeowners we just discussed, can list their idle hardware for public use.
So it's like an Airbnb for chargers.
Exactly. Consider the utilization rate of a standard home charger. If I have a charger in my driveway and I drive my car to work from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., that hardware sits entirely idle for 8 hours.
Just doing nothing.
Right. P2P allows me to monetize that downtime by renting the charger out to an apartment dweller in my immediate neighborhood.
The brilliance of this is that it completely bypasses the commercial traps we talked about earlier. Why does P2P sit in the pricing sweet spot of 10 to 14 rupees per kilowatt hour? Because it utilizes residential tariff.
Yes. The host isn't a commercial charging point operator.
Right. They aren't paying premium commercial land rents. They aren't hit with massive utility demand charges because it's just a standard 7.4 kilowatt AC draw. No different than running a couple of large air conditioners. It's just neighbors sharing residential power with a small software fee taken by the platform.
And the math works out to roughly 1.71 rupees per kilometer. It is about 40% cheaper than public AC charging and a massive 70% cheaper than public DC fast charging.
Scaling this concept reveals its true value to the national infrastructure. The government has stated that India needs hundreds of thousands of public chargers by 2030 to meet basic electrification goals.
But securing commercial real estate, obtaining high-tension grid connections, and deploying capital for massive DC charging hubs takes years.
It's incredibly slow. But P2P instantly unlocks hundreds of thousands of existing, privately funded, underutilized assets. It solves a massive infrastructure bottleneck, with absolutely zero new capital expenditure from the state.
It's incredibly efficient from a macro perspective.
Instead of waiting for a massive corporation to buy expensive land and pour concrete to build 1 million new gas stations, the realization is that we already have 1 million driveways. We are turning existing distributed hardware into a nationwide grid overnight.
It's brilliant.
But I want to explore the sociological angle here. Mathematically it makes sense, but how does the trust element work? I am essentially asking a stranger to let me park my expensive car in their private driveway, and they are trusting a stranger not to damage their property.
The platforms manage the trust through strict digital verification, similar to a ride-sharing app. Both the host and the driver are KYC verified.
So everyone's identity is logged.
Yes. And the payment is handled entirely through an escrow system in the app, so there is no awkward haggling over cash. Furthermore, the smart chargers used in these networks authenticate the specific vehicle before dispensing power, preventing electricity theft.
And there's another massive logistical advantage for the user: hyperlocality. If I live in a dense neighborhood, there is a very high probability that a P2P host is within 500 meters of my apartment.
Which is huge for convenience.
Totally. I eliminate the travel cost of driving 3 kilometers out of my way into heavy traffic just to sit at a commercial charging hub. Plus, we discussed the battery chemistry earlier. P2P inherently uses slow AC charging. The lithium ions are flowing at a gentle pace.
The restorative nature of AC charging is critical. Utilizing P2P as your primary energy source ensures that you are preserving the chemical integrity of the battery cells, delaying degradation, and protecting the long-term resale value of the vehicle.
Let's run a reality check on the monthly savings. We need to see exactly how powerful this P2P switch is for an apartment dweller who feels locked out of the home charging utopia. Let's build a scenario around a moderate to heavy urban commuter driving 1,000 kilometers a month.
We must first calculate the baseline of the fast charging trap.
Okay, lay it out.
If this user lives in a high-rise, has no personal charger, and relies entirely on public DC fast charging out of necessity, their blended cost is roughly 2.85 rupees per kilometer. For 1,000 kilometers, their monthly charging cost is 2,850 rupees.
Now let's execute the P2P switch. If this exact same user downloads a P2P app and integrates a neighborhood charger into their routine, their cost drops to 1.70 rupees per kilometer.
That's a huge drop.
Their monthly cost plummets to 1,700 rupees. That is a direct, verified cash saving of 1,150 rupees every single month. Over a year, that is nearly 14,000 rupees saved, purely by changing whose meter they are pulling power from.
It is essential to contextualize that against internal combustion. If that 1,000 kilometers was driven in a standard petrol car, assuming 9 rupees per kilometer, that owner is facing a 9,000 rupee monthly fuel bill.
So EV wins regardless.
Right. Even if the EV owner falls completely into the most expensive public DC charging trap, the EV is still vastly cheaper than petrol. The savings are guaranteed. But leveraging the P2P network is how the apartment dweller maximizes the financial advantage to mirror the homeowner's experience as closely as possible.
I follow the math entirely. But the behavioral shift is what I think people will struggle with. If I don't have a charger in my basement, what does my daily habit actually look like? Do I just sit awkwardly in my neighbor's driveway for 6 hours while the car trickle charges? Like, how does a normal, busy person integrate this into a functional human life?
You have to completely abandon the empty to full gas station mindset.
I could reprogram my brain.
Exactly. The internal combustion era taught us to wait until the low fuel light comes on, then go to a centralized location to rapidly fill a large tank. With an EV, and specifically with hyper-local P2P charging, you adopt a grazing or top-up mindset.
Grazing, I like that.
Because the charger is 500 meters from your home, you drop the car off at the host's driveway at 7:40 p.m., plug it in, and walk home. You eat dinner, you watch television, you sleep. The car is grazing on cheap power while you are living your life.
Or you drop it off on your way to a nearby grocery store for 2 hours.
Exactly. You give the car small meals of power whenever it naturally aligns with your schedule.
It really is exactly like managing a smartphone battery. You don't let your phone die completely to 0% before you plug it in. You give it a snack of power when you're sitting at your desk or when you plug it in for Apple CarPlay in your vehicle. You just keep it topped up.
And returning to our parking garage metaphor, keeping the battery topped up within a specific range is chemically optimal, which leads us to how you architect a weekly schedule.
Yes, let's build the definitive weekly charging schedule for the urban apartment commuter. We've established P2P as the financial savior. Now let's map it out over 7 days to make it frictionless.
Let's do it.
He'll take our profile. An urban commuter, no home charger, driving about 35 kilometers a day, which totals roughly 250 kilometers for the work week. They drive a mid-size 40-kilowatt-hour EV, giving them a real-world safe range of about 320 kilometers.
The foundational rule of this schedule is the 20-80 rule. You orchestrate your life to keep your battery's state of charge strictly between 20% and 80%.
Why those specific numbers?
Pushing a battery below 20% increases the risk of deep discharge degradation. Pushing it above 80% engages that chemical traffic jam we discussed earlier. The car's internal computer will actively throttle the incoming power to protect the cells.
So trying to get to 100 is just fighting the chemistry.
Right. Forcing the battery from 80% to 100% takes a disproportionately long time, wastes energy as heat, and accelerates wear.
So with the 20-80 rule acting as our guardrails, here is how the week actually flows.
Yeah.
Monday morning, you start your commute with the battery at 80%. Monday through Wednesday, you do absolutely nothing regarding charging.
You just drive.
You commute 35 kilometers a day. You have zero charging anxiety. By Wednesday evening, after 3 days of driving, your battery has dropped from 80% down to roughly 45%.
This triggers the midweek top-up. Wednesday evening, you open your P2P app and book a charger in your neighborhood. You drop the car off at 6:30 p.m., plug in, and walk home.
Very simple.
You let the car graze for just 3 to 4 hours on a 7.4 kilowatt AC charger. That 4-hour session adds roughly 15 to 20 kilowatt hours of energy. It smoothly brings the battery back from 45% up to your 80% limit.
And the cost for that?
At a P2P rate of 12 rupees, that specific top-up cost you exactly 180 to 240 rupees. At 10:00 p.m., you walk over, unplug, and park the car back in your apartment basement.
Then, Thursday and Friday, you resume normal driving. The battery drops back down from 80% to around 50% by Friday night. Now the weekend hits.
The weekend top-up.
Exactly. Saturday or Sunday is designated for the weekend top-up. You are naturally out running errands, or maybe you go to a shopping mall to catch a movie. You utilize a public AC charger located in the mall parking lot, paying a slightly higher 14 or 15 rupees per kilowatt hour, or you use another P2P point near the restaurant you are visiting.
Because you are naturally parked there for 4 or 5 hours anyway, the car quietly resets back to 80%, ready for Monday morning.
Analyze the strategic elegance of that routine. At no point did the user experience range anxiety. They completely avoided the brutal 26 rupee per kilowatt hour luxury tax of DC fast chargers.
They avoided daily 100% charges, preserving the battery chemistry.
They utilized the hyperlocal P2P network as a reliable home base for the essential midweek boost, and utilized public AC purely as a secondary passive convenience when their human behavior already required them to be parked for an extended period. They manipulated their environment to enforce the lowest possible running costs.
It turns what initially feels like a massive insurmountable hurdle, not having a private basement meter, into a highly predictable, easily managed routine.
But this highly controlled grazing strategy works beautifully because the city commuter operates on a predictable loop.
Yeah.
What happens when we break the loop?
The highway scenario.
When you take that EV on the highway, the entire economic structure we just built completely inverts.
The highway scenario strips away all of the decentralized advantages we just discussed. Let's examine the intercity traveler profile. An owner taking frequent 300-plus kilometer road trips between major cities.
Okay, so they're outside their neighborhood.
Unlike the daily commuter who is actively leveraging P2P networks at 1.70 rupees per kilometer, the intercity traveler is severed from the neighborhood grid. They are a captive audience, entirely dependent on the centralized infrastructure of public DC fast chargers.
And as we establish, those stations are the minibar of the charging world. The highway DC rates easily push 20 to 26 rupees per kilowatt hour.
And remember the physics loss.
Right. Combine that with the intense heat generation of pushing massive kilowatts, hitting that 1.15 loss factor, and your actual cost per kilometer balloons to 2.80 or even 3.20. So how does an informed owner budget and navigate a long-distance trip without feeling like they are being extorted by the infrastructure?
It requires a strict decision-making guide to minimize exposure to the luxury tax. Rule number 1. Never begin a journey empty. You must start the trip at 100% state of charge.
Because you want the cheap power first.
The night before departure, you utilize your home charger or a P2P network to fill the battery entirely on cheap, slow AC power. You are effectively front-loading the journey with the cheapest possible energy.
Fill the battery with 10 rupee energy, so you have to buy less of the 26 rupee energy on the road.
Exactly. Rule number 2 dictates behavior at the highway station itself. When you must stop to use a DC fast charger, you only charge up to 80%. Never attempt to hit 100% on a fast charger.
Because of the parking garage traffic jam.
Right. Remember the parking garage metaphor. As you cross 80%, the car's computer throttles the power intake to protect the battery from the chemical traffic jam. If you stay plugged in, the charging speed drops to a crawl.
But you're still paying the premium rates.
You are now paying premium luxury tax rates plus potential time-based idle fees from the network operator for an agonizingly slow trickle of power. Unplug at 80%, merge back onto the highway, and drive to the next station down the route.
If we look at the blended cost reality for a hybrid user, let's say an owner who drives 1,500 kilometers a month, where 70% is city driving managed via cheap POP or home power, and 30% is highway driving heavily reliant on expensive DC fast chargers, their blended monthly rate averages out to roughly 1.87 rupees per kilometer.
It is still incredibly cheap compared to the 9 rupee petrol baseline, but it perfectly highlights how heavily those few hours on the highway drag the average operational cost upward.
The NIAIO policy documents offer a profound insight into how the state views this highway dilemma. They argue that the infrastructure rollout must evolve past mere mathematical placement.
Yeah, their take on this is really smart.
Currently, Operators tend to place chargers at rigid intervals, say every 50 kilometers, regardless of what is around them. And EIOG notes that chargers must be co-located with natural human haltage points.
Right, piggybacking on human behavior.
Don't drop a massive DC charger in an empty dirt lot in the middle of nowhere and expect families to be happy sitting in their car staring at a screen for 40 minutes. You have to put the infrastructure where humans naturally want to stop for an hour anyway. Massive food courts, major rest stops, scenic points. You align the charging curve with the digestion curve.
Aligning infrastructure with human psychology reduces the perceived friction of the technology. The charging time ceases to be wasted time if the occupants are engaged in an activity they intended to do regardless.
Okay, we have covered the individual commuter manipulating P2P. We have covered the highway traveler dodging the minibar tax. Now, we are going to look completely behind the curtain.
This is where the math gets terrifying.
We are going to look at the hidden architecture of how commercial fleets and the national grid are managing the charging boom. Because if a single commuter trying to save a few hundred rupees on a weekend trip requires this much strategic foresight, imagine the terrifying math for a logistics company running a fleet of 50 or 100 electric delivery vans. For them, a charging strategy isn't just about saving money on a trip. It is about preventing outright corporate bankruptcy.
The stakes in the commercial sector are existential. The Zeph Point research details this beautifully. Let's outline the commercial reality first. We are talking about massive taxi fleets like Uber, Ola, or Everest Fleet, and vast networks of urban delivery vans for e-commerce.
They operate on a depot model, returning to a central hub overnight.
And the baseline running cost is what drives the transition. They operate at roughly 1 to 1.5 rupees per kilometer versus a diesel van's 8 to 10 rupees per kilometer. For a vehicle driving 200 kilometers a day, the business case is undeniable. The total cost of ownership flips drastically in favor of the EV within 18 months.
But there is a massive hidden trap waiting for these fleet operators. The research highlights a phenomenon we can call the 6.00 p.m. penalty. Let's paint the scenario. A regional delivery fleet's chief operating officer decides to electrify 20 delivery vans to slash operational costs and hit ESG targets.
Sounds like a solid corporate move.
They install 20 fast chargers at the depot. But the facility manager, operating entirely on decades of legacy internal combustion habits, treats the new EV chargers exactly like traditional diesel pumps. At 6:00 p.m., all 20 drivers return from their daily routes, park the vans, and immediately plug all 20 of them in simultaneously. What actually happens in that moment?
Mathematically, it triggers a localized catastrophe. Plugging 20 commercial EVs in at the exact same second creates a massive instantaneous electrical load spike on the grid. And this is where you need to understand that commercial utility billing differs radically from a standard home electricity bill.
Right, because my home bill is just about total volume.
Exactly. Commercial utility boards do not just bill a business for the total aggregate volume of energy consumed over the month. They aggressively monitor the facility's power draw minute by minute, and they penalize the business heavily for peak demand.
Look, I get paying for volume. If I use 1,000 units, I pay for 1,000 units. Why is the utility company penalizing a business just for using the energy quickly?
Because of the physics of grid infrastructure, the utility company is obligated to provide a stable grid. If your depot suddenly demands a massive surge of power at 6.0 CRM, the utility company has to ensure that the local transformers, the neighborhood substations, and the high-tension transmission lines are all physically capable of handling that absolute peak moment without melting down or triggering a localized blackout.
So they have to build huge infrastructure just for that one moment.
Yes, they have to overbuild the physical infrastructure to accommodate your worst-case 15-minute scenario. They pass the massive capital cost of that overbuilt infrastructure directly to the commercial operator via a peak demand fee.
So the utility company looks at the fleet's entire 30-day billing cycle, scans through the data to find the single 15-minute window where the depot drew the absolute highest amount of power, and they calculate a massive financial penalty based exclusively on that one spike.
Yes. That single, unmanaged 6.00 p.m. charging event, where 20 vans pulled maximum power simultaneously because of human habit, can trigger a demand penalty of 10,000 rupees or easily push into the 5-figure USD equivalent depending on the scale of the fleet.
That is mind-blowing. A single 15-minute mistake by a facility manager literally wipes out the entire month's operational fuel savings of ditching diesel.
Completely erases it.
The COO's carefully calculated return on investment projection collapses instantly because they treated the new technology like the old technology. So how does a fleet fix this? My immediate thought, if I am staring at a spreadsheet showing massive utility penalties, is that I need to buy my way out of it with hardware.
That's the old way of thinking.
Right, like, do they need to purchase massive multi-million rupee industrial battery banks to buffer the load? Do they need to petition the city to dig up the street and install a significantly larger transformer for the depot?
That is the legacy hardware approach, and it is entirely unnecessary. The true genius of the modern ecosystem is that the fix requires absolutely zero new hardware. The solution is entirely algorithmic.
Software.
It is achieved through software. The standard commercial EV chargers operate on an open-source standard called OCPP Open Charge Point Protocol. Deep tech startups like ZevPoint are deploying sophisticated software platforms that integrate directly with these chargers via lightweight APIs.
I want to break down that acronym soup for a second. An API is essentially a software bridge. It allows two different computer programs to talk to each other. So the software startup builds a bridge to the physical chargers on the wall.
Exactly. The software acts as an omniscient middleman. Let's look at what the software actually knows. First, it reads the vehicle telematics through an API bridge to the vans themselves. It knows exactly how much battery each of the 20 vans currently has. Van 1 might be at 20%, Van 2 at 60%.
Okay, so it knows the current state.
Second, the software integrates with the fleet's daily routing and dispatch software, so it knows precisely how many kilometers each specific van is scheduled to drive tomorrow.
That's critical.
Third, it pulls the live dynamic data from the local utility company, so it knows exactly what the time of use tariffs and peak demand thresholds are for that specific zip code.
So armed with all of that data, 6:00 p.m. rolls around, all 20 drivers plug their vans in. What does the software do?
Instead of letting the chargers violently dump maximum power into all 20 vehicles, the second the physical connection is made, the algorithm seizes control. It orchestrates the charge over the entire night.
How does it prioritize?
It knows Van 2 is at 60% and only has a short route tomorrow, so it completely blocks Van 2 from drawing power at 6:00 p.m. It tells Van 1, which is heavily depleted, to start charging at 9:00 p.m. It schedules Van 3 to begin drawing power at 1:00 a.m. when the utility rates are at their absolute cheapest.
It aggressively staggers the load.
Yes. By the time the sun comes up and the drivers return at 6:00 a.m., all 20 vans have exactly the specific amount of energy they need to complete their assigned routes. The total aggregate amount of energy consumed over the entire night is exactly the same as if they had all charged at 6 p.m.
But the spike is gone.
But the shape of the demand curve is radically different. It has been completely flattened. That catastrophic 15-minute load spike never happens. The massive utility penalty is completely avoided.
The physical hardware, the charger mounted on the concrete wall, is essentially dumb. It is just a high-tech hose. The software is the intelligent traffic cop preventing a multi-car pileup on the local electrical grid.
It is pure restorative engineering. And the business models for these charge management startups are fascinating. They often do not charge a flat monthly software as a service fee.
How do they make money then?
They utilize shared savings contracts. They take a percentage of the mathematically verified utility penalty reduction. If their algorithm successfully navigates the dispatch requirements and saves the logistics company $10,000 a month in peak demand penalties, the startup takes a cut of the savings. They are literally monetizing mathematical efficiency.
But the NLR research emphasizes that this concept doesn't just stop at saving one logistics company from bankruptcy. This algorithmic orchestration scales to protect the entire national power grid.
If we zoom out from the depot to the national level, this concept of charge orchestration is fundamentally vital for the survival of the grid itself. The NLR research details how this ties into macro grid management and what utilities call the duck curve.
I've heard this term thrown around in renewable energy circles. What exactly is the duck curve?
It is a visual representation of a massive problem caused by solar energy. During the middle of the day when the sun is shining, solar panels pump massive amounts of cheap energy into the grid. The overall demand for power from traditional utility plants drops significantly.
So they don't have to generate as much.
Right. The graph curve dips down, creating the belly of the duck. But as the sun sets around 5:00 or 6:00 p.m., solar production plummets to zero. Simultaneously, people come home from work, turn on their air conditioners, their ovens, their televisions.
Massive demand spike.
Historically, utility companies had to rapidly fire up highly expensive, highly polluting natural gas peaker plants to meet this massive sudden ramp-up in demand. That steep ramp-up forms the neck of the duck on the graph.
And if you add millions of unmanaged EVs all plugging in right at 6:00 p.m., you make the neck of the duck impossibly steep. You break the grid.
Precisely. If utility companies have to manage millions of EVs spiking demand at 6:00 p.m., their only traditional solution is to spend billions of dollars building new power plants and laying thicker transmission lines.
Which takes decades.
This is where charge orchestration becomes what experts call a non-wire solution. By using software, time-of-day pricing, and smart APIs to shift EV charging away from the 6:00 p.m. peak and into the deep night, or even utilizing vehicle-to-grid technology to push battery power back into the grid during the peak, we smooth out the duck curve.
So we avoid building the power plants.
We manage the drastically increased electricity demand of the transportation sector without having to build multi-billion-dollar traditional power plant. We're solving physical, concrete infrastructure problems exclusively with code.
Which brings us right back full circle to you, our listener, the apartment dweller sitting in their living room. Because this massive commercial grid-saving charge orchestration logic, it is the exact same underlying logic behind the weekly charging schedule we built earlier.
It's the exact same game.
When our commuter decides to use a P2P charger for a midweek top-up, or actively schedules their car's onboard computer to wait until 1:00 a.m. to begin drawing power, they're playing the exact same game as the mega fleet COO. They are manipulating time to defeat peak energy constraints.
It is the ultimate democratization of energy management. Whether you are a chief operating officer managing a fleet of 50 logistics vans or a single apartment resident managing one hatchback, the fundamental rules of physics and the rules of utility billing are identical. Master the algorithm of your own schedule, align your consumption with the realities of the grid, and you completely master the economics of your vehicle.
What an incredible journey today. Let's do a comprehensive recap of what we've mapped out. We started by calculating the cold, hard math of EV charging, proving mechanically that home charging is the cheapest, public DC charging is a heavily taxed luxury due to the physics of battery heat generation, and peer-to-peer networks sit in the perfect economic sweet spot by bypassing commercial tariffs.
The math doesn't lie.
We built a highly practical week-long grazing schedule that relies on the 20/80 rule to save an apartment dweller thousands of rupees a year while preserving battery health. We navigated the expensive reality of highway fast charging by strategically front-loading cheap energy. And finally, we peeked behind the curtain to see how algorithmic fleet management is utilizing APIs to flatten the duck curve and save commercial logistics from utility bankruptcy.
Every single point we covered ultimately comes back to realizing that an EV is no longer just a car. It is an active node on a massive, highly sensitive electrical grid. And how you manage your specific node dictates your entire financial experience. However, I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative thought.
Oh, lay it on us.
Something that wasn't explicitly calculated in our cost breakdowns today, but is heavily hinted at in the long-term NEIOG policy outlines.
We always have room for one more paradigm shift.
The battery passport. NEIOG has conceptually suggested the establishment of a comprehensive digital passport system for EV batteries. This isn't just a paper certificate. Imagine a highly secure, cryptographic digital ledger potentially utilizing blockchain technology that tracks every single charge your specific EV battery takes over its entire physical lifespan.
Wait, tracking every charge. So the exact history of my charging behavior becomes a permanent, verifiable record attached to the car's VIN.
Exactly. The ledger records whether you primarily use gentle, restorative, slow AC charging on a P2P network, keeping the cells within that healthy 20/80 band, or it exposes if you constantly hammered the chemistry with high heat, 100% DC fast charges every single day because you didn't bother to optimize your routine.
The implications of that for the used car market are staggering.
They are absolute. Imagine a near future where the resale value of your used EV isn't based on a subjective mechanics inspection, the odometer reading, or how clean the interior is. The capital value of the asset depends entirely on that digital ledger.
So the data defines the price.
If your battery passport mathematically proves you used restorative AC charging for 90% of its life, the battery degradation is verifiably low, and your car commands a massive premium on the secondary market. If the ledger exposes a history of chemical abuse via constant fast charging, the resale value completely plummets. Furthermore, OEMs could eventually tie their 8-year battery warranties directly to the passport, voiding claims if the ledger proves the owner willfully ignored charging best practices.
In the very near future, your daily charging habits won't just dictate your monthly electricity bill. They will permanently dictate the entire capital resale value of your asset. The ledger will enforce good behavior. The gas pump we talked about at the very beginning of this deep dive, it isn't just broken. It is evolving. It's turning into a digital auditor, permanently recording every single decision you make about where, when, and how you pull energy from the grid. It brings an absolute ruthless level of precision to the seemingly murky waters of EV economics. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this comprehensive blueprint helps you look at your daily commute, your city's electrical grid, and maybe the unused driveway next door in a completely new way. Keep grazing, respect the grid, and stay curious.